So, hi all, welcome to our webinar on Youth for Climate Action, the Generation of Change. It's a pleasure to be welcome all of you guys and all of our audiences. I want to thank every one of our participants in this webinar and everyone that will be tuning in. Low Carbon City is a citizen-led global organization that works to tackle climate change from an urban context through collective actions, knowledge, education, and creativity. Where I'm just gonna let Tatiana from la Universidad de los Niños, FIT here from Medellin, start. And I wish you all a brilliant webinar. And let's hear from the generation of change.
That's great. Thank you. So to give a start to this meeting we are holding today, I would like to introduce myself a little bit. I am Tatiana Bustamante. I am a professional in communications with an emphasis in digital media. I recently graduated from Leeds University in the United Kingdom in a new media master degree. I have experience in research, photography, and video production, and I am currently part of the team in Universidad de los Niños in Medellin, like you said before, and which is a program that fosters critical understanding of scientific knowledge by children and young people and mediators from diverse social backgrounds. So it's pretty interesting for me to be here today sharing so many interesting ideas from the special guests we have with us today. So let's start with it. In order to discuss about today's topic, Youth for Climate Action, the Generation, we have three very special ladies, and I'm going to introduce them to you. But further on, they will tell us a little bit more about what they do, where they come from, and what are their ideas with what they do on a daily basis. So first of all, I want to welcome Eowyn Soran, who is the outreach coordinator at Our Children's Trust. Secondly, we have Malina Aniol, which is an active member of Plant for the Planet since 2014. And we also have Elsa Mengistu. She's the director of partnerships at 0 Hour. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you for being with us today. And like I said, further on, we can explore a little bit more about each one of you. So it happened that in the UN Climate Change COP24 conference, Greta Thunberg, a 15-year-old activist, she told the assembly at that moment that, and I quote, "Change is coming, whether you like it or not." Leader of her generation, and her idea was to inspire young people in the world to strike every Friday instead of going to school. The young could be characterized as not being mature enough or lacking experience to approach serious topics, such as economy, politics, or in this case, environment. However, in the context of climate change and political inactivity, young people could provide a new outlook on our society and be the leaders of change, which is actually what is gathering us today at this point. Climate change will directly impact future generations' way of living. Thus, the role of young people in tackling against climate change is essential. Okay, so in the first part of this web seminar, we are going to discover who the speakers are and what they are doing to fight climate change. And in the second part, we will talk about the different difficulties they have to face on a daily basis as young people trying to find solutions to prevent this situation. And as well, how can we help them as the audience that is currently listening to them. So if we are going to begin, I'd like to know a little bit more about definitions. And I'd like to know from you, our speakers, how can we define youth? What does a young person do? How can we define it? Um, and as well, what does fighting for the climate means? So, does any one of you would like to give me an idea? What do you think youth means? Maybe Eowyn, would you like to tell me?
Yeah, I think youth means young people, all young people, and in this context, young people who are standing up for their rights to a climate system that can actually sustain their lives.
Okay. Elsa would like to add something.
Yeah. Like she said, youth are people, they're just young people who are standing up for their futures. But we also have to remember a lot of the youth that are standing up for their futures are youth that are not of voting age. And so when I work, when the reason we work by striking or we work by going directly to our elected officials instead of voting is because we are youth and we can't vote.
Okay. And Malina, would you like to talk as well in this matter?
Yeah, sure. So I think youth, like the others already said, is like there is a big span of age. So you can be 6 and you are young and part of the youth movement, or you could also be 21 and be part in the movement. I think the important point is that we are all fighting for our rights and make our voices heard. And so this is the thing that connects all of us, I think.
Okay, that's a good introduction and a good way of getting to know what you guys think. But now I believe we all want to know a little bit further about your stories, your different stories. So, can you tell us how did you decide to get involved in your particular organizations? If any of you want to take the the lead, or if we go with the same order as before, should we go with the same order? Okay, so let's start with Ewing.
Hi, so I work for our Children's Trust. I'm 21 years old, and I actually learned about climate change for the first time when I was about 18. I didn't grow up with knowledge that climate change, human-caused climate change, was going to affect me or people around the world. And so when I learned about climate change, I was horrified and determined to find organizations in my city that were working on the issue at a systemic level rather than at an individual level, because I found that individual actions, while they're important, they don't do much when an entire system is preventing progress. So that's how I found our Children's Trust and got involved.
I work for an organization called Zero Hour. I found them on Facebook. They were just a bunch of like teenagers posting about climate action and that they were organizing the next global youth climate march, and I was really excited. And it was the first time that I saw a climate organization not simply focus on data or just science, but also the people that are impacted directly by climate change. And that was really interesting to me, and I think that's one of the most valuable aspects of climate justice, and that's why I got involved with them.
So I started, yeah, when I was 14 years old, and I joined the Plant for the Planet movement. It was more out of luck because they were in my hometown, and I thought, well, that would be a great idea to join a movement and really do something. And then I somehow got, well, really into the movement because I learned so much more about the climate change than I did before in school, for example. And I really had the feeling like I could help people. And so this is how it started for me.
Okay, that all sounds very interesting. But now, in order for us to understand a little bit more about what do you think about teenagers in general? Why do you think it's important for teenagers as a mass population, as a social group, to get involved against the climate change, to fight against climate change?
Well, I think that it's important because teenagers are the first generation who will inherit climate chaos. And so we as young people are fighting to protect our climate because we're fighting to protect our lives. And I think that teenagers and children specifically can have this effect of bringing moral clarity to adults, and that's primarily because teenagers and young people haven't caused our climate crisis, and the adults have, and we're yet still the ones suffering from it.
I think it's important for teenagers and youth in general to be involved because historically, at least in the United States, youth and young people have been on the front line of most of our social change. And our social change is going to come from the same place. And like she just said, youth are the first ones to inherit climate change, like as a full generation. Um, and so it's not that we should or something. It's something we have to do, and that's why it's important for us to be involved.
And I think a main problem is also that our voices are not heard enough. For example, we are not able to vote, or I wasn't until last year able to vote the politicians who might change something. So I think it's a great possibility for the youth to like act up, because otherwise politicians wouldn't listen to us. So that's a main problem too.
Yeah, but if we're going to analyze the situation of a normal teenager that would like to be part of this, one of the main obstacles that this person will find would be, uh, other people might say, would be the knowledge. Like adults might say, you don't know much about climate change. You don't know what really is going on. So your part on this of fight really needs a bigger, solid base to start with. What would you say to that situation? What would you say to teenagers that want to be part of it but don't really have the knowledge to make a debate and to make a discussion out of it? Maybe we can start with Malina in this case.
Yeah, sure. So I think you can join into this movement if you have knowledge or not, because you will gain some knowledge, and it's not so hard in our digitalization age to gain knowledge and to read up. So I think you should definitely join the movement, because other people will help you find the confidence to have some discussions and to discuss them with older people. And I think most of the people also in politics often don't know really what they are talking about, but you are able to learn about it. So don't feel discouraged by other people telling you that you don't have enough knowledge or anything like this.
Okay, and Elsa, in this case, what can you tell us?
I would say, so what? It doesn't matter what adults are gonna say because they're always gonna say something. Just show up and show out. Our job isn't to make people feel good. Our job is to change the world. Um, and so start with something small and then work more in your community. It doesn't matter what adults have to say because we're not here to work for them.
Okay, and finally, Eowyn.
Yeah, similar to what Melina was saying, I think having the knowledge doesn't necessarily matter too much when you're getting involved. I, for example, didn't have much knowledge, but was able to educate myself through my peers and through the community. And in addition, we do have, thankfully, in this world, we have amazing scientists that are conducting the experiments, that are doing the research and telling us about what their findings are. And so we can rely on those scientists and policy experts to give us more information about what needs to be done. And our job is just to have the push behind those policies that they're proposing so that we can get them implemented. So I think that the knowledge is important, but it's not, you don't have to have a ton of knowledge to make change, and you gain it as you go.
Okay. And what do you think if we now discuss a little bit more about your organizations in particular? So can you tell us what your organizations do on a daily basis? What actions that are taking place in your different locations? Elsa, would you like to share with us?
Yeah. My organization is called This Is 0 Hour. This is 0 Hour, referring to the fact that this is 0 hour to act on climate change. Our organization is 100% youth run, and we are based internationally, and we work remotely for the national team. We focus on making sure that our climate work is diverse, youth centered, and frontline uplifted. Um, so making sure that those that are impacted by climate change are the ones leading this movement, and making sure that we intersect social justice into our climate justice, whether that be through lobbying on the Hill, lobbying our local representatives, um, organizing a march, or adding 30,000 signatures to the Supreme Court case, Juliana v. United States, of in support of our like brothers and sisters, or organizing a summit where kids can get the leadership skills that they need to be climate leaders in their own communities.
Okay, and Malina?
So, my organization, Plant for the Planet, we try to educate children everywhere in the world. So, we have these seminars called academies where other children teach children or try to educate them on the climate change and what we can actually do. So, you could join clubs, you could talk to like politicians, or for example, you could also sign letters where you're asking politicians to change something or join discussions. So there are so many possibilities you have. Or what is special about our organization is that we are like planting trees to fight the climate change, so to absorb the CO2 that is emitted. So this is also a small step you could take on a like not a daily basis, but you could, for example, just plant a tree and it would also help a little bit.
Okay, and now taking into account your personal actions on a daily basis, as Elsa, as Eowyn, as Malina, what do you girls do to make this planet a better place? Eowyn, do you want to tell us?
Well, most of my work is around things that our Children's Trust is working on. So I primarily do outreach to students, communities of faith, and environmental groups to spread awareness about our primary case, which Elsa mentioned, that's Juliana versus the United States. And so most of my work revolves around organizing, mobilizations, and some social media communications work. And personally, I like to take that back to my community and work on building resilience in my neighborhood specifically, and within the student community as well in Eugene, Oregon.
Yeah, and like as a person, like leaving aside the organization as an entity, you as Eowyn, what do you do on a daily basis to take care of the planet?
So that actually is a lot of my community organizing as an individual. So I work with my neighborhood to try to build our community so that we can be more resilient in the face of some of the climate challenges in the future. So that's primarily what I work on. I also try to keep my carbon footprint down as much as possible, while still advocating for systemic change.
Okay, and Elsa, would you like to tell us?
Yeah, I think in my local community, the most important thing that I can do is really talking to my peers about what climate change is and climate justice. I do live in an area that, unfortunately, climate change isn't a very favorable topic among people. And so, really, just bringing up the fact that climate change is here, it's happening, it's going to get worse, it's human made. Um, and just really electrifying those around me to do something. That's something I do every day. Um, Also transitioning into eating less meat, and lowering my carbon footprint. That's something I'm working on as well.
Okay, and Malina?
So as an individual, I would say like I also try to keep my carbon footprint as well as small as I can. For example, I try to, or I live vegan, I also try to live like zero waste and all this stuff, or just to use public transport instead of like the car or anything like this. But I think the most important part is also that I try to educate my peers and just to educate them on the European elections, for example, like on a daily basis via social media. So just use my voice to talk about all the important issues. I think that's the main thing.
And how do you think people receive this kind of communication that you give them when you're trying to tell them who you are and educate them in topics concerning climate change and so on? Do people react in a good way? Do they seem receptive with the information you give them? Malina?
Well, I think it's quite diverse. Some people are really eager to learn more and are really listening and trying to, well, improve like the lifestyle or the way they are acting. But I also had the experience that some people just wouldn't listen just because I was young or just because they thought I didn't have enough knowledge. So this is also an experience I had, and uh, well, not only a few times, but quite often.
And how do you react to it? How do you take it? Like, is it okay, or does it affect you, or you just move on to the next person that might want to hear you out?
Well, most of the time, I try to convince the person that I am able to talk about the climate change because everyone is able to talk about it. And just because you don't have the most or all the knowledge about it doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about it. So, and only because I'm young, it shouldn't affect people listening to me or not. So, most of the time, I try to talk a bit further to the person, but if they don't want to listen, then at some point I say to myself that it's their problem. Yeah.
Okay. And Eowyn, would you like to tell us about your experience?
Yeah, I would say for me individually, I don't, most people are pretty receptive, and I think that's partially because of living in the Pacific Northwest in the US and having a community that's very aware of climate change. But with some of the plaintiffs that are young people, ages 11 through 23 in our federal case, they often are kind of questioned by people and criticized for maybe not knowing things, especially if they don't know the answer to a question. But all in all, our community is very supportive, which is very nice to have that kind of support. But it isn't always that way, and we just try to let it roll off of us and realize that we're doing something that is going to make a difference, whether or not people acknowledge it at the time.
So it's a positive balance on your area, you will say.
Yes, for sure.
That's good. And Elsa, how about you?
I'd say within my different communities, I get different responses. The main one is apathy or not really being concerned. We had like several hurricanes in the span of like 3 weeks this fall, which is not normal for North Carolina, and no one would chalk it up to climate change. Like, oh, the weather's acting funky. No, it's climate change. The whenever you bring that up, it just falls on deaf ears. It's like, oh, it's climate change. Oh, that'll happen in 10 years. Like, no, like it's really that's really interesting. But when I work within my community, I don't get that. Maybe a difference in how we view climate justice, but everyone's on the same page about climate change.
So you will say that from now on, we will get more examples that we can actually see on our areas that will tell people that it's actually a bad situation we are going through. You will say
Yeah.
that?
I would say it's already happening, yes.
Okay. So it's very interesting to know how you interact with your different communities. And I would like to know about how do you interact with your families in these cases? Do they support you? Do they also hear you out? Are they also receptive? Or how is the situation concerning this matter? Malina, would you like to tell us?
Yeah, so most of my family is really supportive and really try to, like, my mother tries to join the Parents for Future movement, and she really tries to improve our whole household and make our carbon footprints a bit smaller. So she really is quite receptive. However, I also have older family members who aren't as positive, who think that I am not in a position to talk about it, and this is really like sometimes a bit disturbing because you're trying to do something and not even in your family you always have the support. So yeah, it sometimes is a bit problematic.
Okay, Eowyn, what can you tell us?
Yeah, I think so. So a lot of my family is supportive that I'm trying to work on issues that involve social justice and issues that impact marginalized communities and impact people from all over the world. But my family actually doesn't believe that climate change is caused by humans or that it's abnormal. It's kind of they have the kind of argument of the climate is always changing. So that's been a challenge to work for an organization that is suing the government for causing climate change. But I just am aware that this is what I want to be doing, and I think that people not believing in climate change or not believing that it's human caused or that it's happening now is just mostly fear based. And the best thing that I can do to combat people's fears is try to work to strengthen communities and try to prevent the worst effects of climate change from happening. So that's what kind of keeps me going, is trying to prevent even more fear from overtaking people.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. My family, it's not that they're opposed to it, but I am in high school and a lot of my time goes to traveling and organizing and working online, and that doesn't necessarily make them the most comfortable. So it's a balance. They're aware of climate change, but not as aware as they could be. But I'm still gonna do what I do.
That's good. That's the attitude, I will say it. Now, if we listen to the three of you, we might have overheard some of the difficulties you faced on a daily basis when you decided to go into this cause. Now, is there any other difficulties you have with perhaps financiation, or like Elsa shared with us concerning the time, uh, school time, for example, or things like that? How can you cope those agendas, those schedules you handle every day? Eowyn?
Well, I actually was going to go back to school to finish my bachelor's degree this fall, but I decided not to. I will hopefully be going back in another year, but for now, I would like to keep working in our Children's Trust, and I see the federal lawsuit as being one of the most important potentially pieces of history and movements that there are right now, and so I want to be a part of that, and found that school and personal life and working were not going to allow me to have enough time. So, or at least for my sanity. So I decided to take a year off and just work, which I'm content with. And then the way that I see it is that my education, can wait, and I'll get more education as I go. I'm already educating myself, but formal education can wait, but the climate crisis can't wait. And so that's why I made that decision.
Okay, Malina?
So I also see that it's really hard to reconcile everything. Sometimes, for example, when I had my final exams last year, I had to drop out and concentrate on schoolwork really. But I think because I'm so motivated to change something, I always try to just manage it somehow. But it really is a problem. And if you don't have enough support, it can really hit you hard. But most of the time it works out, and you get so much out of it. So it really is worth it.
Okay, and Elsa?
Yeah, I'd say it's really challenging sometimes balancing school and the work I do, but you just find a balance. You kind of have to also being really young, that sometimes that's really a barrier. I travel a lot, and like I'm under 18, so like sometimes like a bunch of stuff happens that like I can't deal with because I'm not an adult yet, technically, I guess. Or just structuring my social life, my school life, work life around everything, that can be really tricky sometimes too, but it's just about a balance.
Okay, yeah, it seems like the three of you kind of like already know a little bit about how to handle this situation. It looks like you already have the experience going forward with this. I was thinking about something at moment ago when I was listening to you, and it seems to me that we can actually make some sort of comparison between how does the course works on Europe and how does the course works on USA, because Elsa and Eowyn, you are in the States, and Malina is in Germany at the moment. So from what I overheard before, we could say that perhaps there are some social groups on the states that kind of like interacts a bit more with the situation. It's interested in it, would like to know a bit more further about it. But that, how does it work in Germany? Malina, if you could tell us, how does the people interact with it in Europe in general, if you could tell us, or in particular in Germany?
So right at the moment we have this movement like Fridays for Future, and like everybody is connecting mostly via social media. So for example, Instagram, or there are like these WhatsApp groups everywhere. So you have like these big mass protests like in Berlin, for example, but you all have also have smaller ones. Like I come from a smaller town, and they also have people like in schools, teachers are getting into the movement. So this is quite big right now at the moment. But for the organization I'm working for, like it's also organized all over Europe. You have different smaller groups, and these academies are taking place like literally everywhere, like also in Germany in smaller towns. But it really depends on the commitment of the members of our or of our organization. So where different academies take place.
Okay, and in the States, Elsa or Eowyn, could you tell us how is the idea in general in the whole country about this from people? Is it positive or is it like?
Um, I think I think most people are on board with the fact that climate change is happening, whether we want it to or not. I think our politicians are not. I think that's the main difference. Also, in the past like year or so, there's been like personally that I've noticed a large growth in the environmental space that I hadn't seen before. So I think that's really positive. But we do have a lot of work ahead of us. Because the idea that climate change isn't real or it's not man-made or it's not going to impact us, that's still very prevalent, and that's still something that's hindering our progress as well.
And Eowyn, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think it's also, I want to echo what Elsa said, but also I think it's challenging for us to organize and for us to build a movement when we have such a huge geographical space to work with that's so spread out. And in addition, when we have such different like social cultures, depending on like the state, and just opinions on climate change or opinions on what we should do about climate change. So I think it makes national organizing very challenging, not impossible, but I think that's part of the reason why we don't see some of the even the climate strikes taking off as much as perhaps they have in Europe. But I think that's changing. Like Elsa said, I think this last year or two, the push for climate justice from the youth specifically has been much stronger than ever before. And that gives me a lot of hope. Still got a long way to go, but it's really cool to see the progress we've made.
Hey, that's good to hear. It's good to hear that you are also having like a internal feeling towards the cause, that it's like somehow getting better or somehow going in a good way. That's good to know. And I would also like to know then a bit further about that topic that Malina told us. briefly about social media. So how would you say that social media have impact on the development of managing the cause from your particular organizations? Could you tell us a little bit more about that, Malina?
So for my organization, it's a bit hard because it's directed mostly at younger people. Like they are mostly the academies I'm talking about are for people around 10 to 14 years old. And nowadays they have social media, so more and more people are looking at our social media presence. But mostly we reach out to people like in reality. So social media right now isn't that important for our organization, but we're working on it so that more our older people are also able to join us, because right now at the moment we are really focused on like smaller children or younger, really young adults. So right now at the moment it isn't that important.
Okay. And how about in Elsa's organization? How does that work?
Social media is how our organization started. Our co-founders found each other on Instagram and then met in person. I found our organization online. A lot of our members join online. A lot of our outreach is online. I mean, it's a very big component of who we are because it allows us to share our message very broadly, very quickly. But it isn't everything about our organization. Like you have to do like in-person outreach. You have to build connections, and that's something you can't always do solely through social media.
Okay, and Eowyn?
Yeah, social media is really important for our organization, primarily because we have supporters all around the country and all around the world, and that's the easiest way to connect with them. But I would say, like, almost more importantly, just media in general has been really important because that's how we get the full story about our lawsuit, our primary lawsuit out, is through a lot of media outlets. And but specifically with social media, that is the best way that we can kind of try to mobilize people and tell them about important court dates, especially because we often get our court dates pretty with short notice to the actual date. So it's social media makes it a lot easier to tell people about that and have them show up for rallies or at least show up for something online, whether that's watching a live stream of the hearing or having a watch party with their community.
And now that we are talking about this, it comes to my mind, how does that influence the interaction with politicians? Do you think politicians pay bigger attention to what you have to say because of the impact on social media, because of the echo that goes out from masses sharing the idea online that you are sharing? Do you think that influence in a good way, or politicians does not listen at all at the end? What do you think about it, Eowyn?
I think that, well, we've seen with youth-led movements that oftentimes when something gets culturally acceptable or really big, especially in the courts, so take the legalization of same-sex marriage in the United States a few years ago, that Supreme Court decision was really, the decision was bolstered by the community, by the nation supporting same-sex marriage. And so I think that when we use social media to show the support we have for our case, that, you know, the politicians see that and the courts see that, and that strengthens their idea that perhaps we have a point to make, and perhaps we do have a constitutional right to a stable climate system, and that they should recognize that. So I do think it's helpful in the long run and overall.
Okay, and what about Malina? What do you think about the interaction with politicians? Do they listen? Do they listen more with social media, or maybe not?
So I would agree with Eowyn because I think it puts more pressure on politicians to listen when they know that so many people are standing behind this movement. And also, like, I our movement started in, I think, 2009, and it was like a small boy. He was 9. He founded this organization, and we really had a lot of media presentations. So we were in a lot of newspapers, and this really helped us to interact with politicians and to approach them to like really do something for the or against the climate change. So I think social media or media in general really can help make you the case.
Um, I'd have to agree with both of them. Social media, it just kind of gives politicians more pressure to act. I think it forces them to be more on their toes than ever because one wrong tweet, one wrong statement, that's a flood in your inbox, it's a flood in your office. And also social media has like allowed people to be more vocal about what they support and what they don't support. And so I think it's really broadened our movement, and I think it also forces politicians to be more receptive to not only their constituents but everybody.
Yeah, that's very interesting to hear about how the new tools and new platforms can like move forward good things as well, not just bad things in general. It can be put into a good use. That's what I will say about that. And now thinking a bit further about politicians as adults, and taking into account how do you interact with an adult community. Have you ever felt discriminated or something like that because you are young? I know we talked before about knowledge as a tool, as a way getting through a discussion. But now my question is more about, have you ever been actually discriminated because of your age when you go into a conversation with a group of people about this topic? Malina, ever?
Um, I don't really think so. Not that extreme. No, I had problems talking to like politicians, for example, like not being taken really seriously, but not like discriminated, like really. So not no.
Okay. Eowyn?
It's kind of interesting because most of my colleagues are at least 10 years older than me. So it's there's kind of two answers I could give. The first is that we as an organization represent, of course, youth, and oftentimes, the youth have faced, I'd say, discrimination or verbally, and we have been accused of using children before to get legislation passed through a court ruling. But I as an individual have sometimes faced, I guess, verbal discrimination from people when giving presentations or when educating people. I think that's just primarily because I'm a youth talking about what other youth are doing. And sometimes older folks maybe will give me some unsolicited advice, sometimes very much appreciated, but other times it could be skepticism or being like, well, why are you guys doing this? Do the plaintiffs really know what they're saying, or are they just repeating what their lawyers are telling them? Do you know what you're saying? And that's really frustrating because I think as young people we know exactly what we're saying, and our lives are at stake, our futures are at stake, and we're just trying to express what we need for our futures to be healthy. And I think adults sometimes maybe want to help out and they have good intentions, but sometimes it is done in a way that might come off as kind of condescending.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I've never had someone personally be rude to me simply because of my age or anything when I work in this space. But as an organization, a lot of people are hesitant to give us support, or they'd ask, "Can I talk to the adult partnerships director or the adult logistics operations director?" No, that's me. I'm signing the contracts. I'm hiring you. That's me. I don't have anyone doing that for me. Or people are hesitant to give us money because we're youth and we don't know how to manage our finances. So sometimes that's really frustrating. But I personally, we haven't received any like negativity from people because of our age. I think we get a lot more support than we do negativity because of it.
That's very impressive. You three girls are very impressive with everything you're doing and everything you have to overcome on a daily basis. That's very impressive. And now that we are talking more directly about youth and young people and like children and like what you are in general, why do you think you can lead the change? Why do you think you have that change in your hands, Eowyn?
Well, to kind of echo what I said earlier, I think that we have, we have, then it's necessary for us to make change happen. And I think we youth as a community can make it happen because we have that urgency, that sense of urgency behind us. And I think we also have the ability to think creatively. So, we're not like some politicians or adults might try to address the problems that we have with climate change from using tools that have already not worked, that have already gotten us to worse problems, whether that's other social injustices or worse climate change, or other environmental harms as a result of trying to mitigate climate change. And I think the benefit that we have, or why we have the upper hand almost, is because we are so young. We have these new ideas that we can bring to the table, and we also have a vision of the future that we want to see, and we're willing to do whatever we can to get there. So I think that gives us a really big advantage.
Okay, Malina.
I think something that is special about the youth is also that we are not like stuck in these ideas of different parties and not working together just because someone has another opinion on a certain topic or is in a certain or in a different party. So I think we're just willing to show solidarity and to work all together for our for our goal, and we all have the same goal, like to live on this planet for some longer time. And so the point of urgency is really a good one. I would totally agree with this. And also we have these new approaches, like we are using social media to gather us, and I think we just have so many new ways of approaching this topic, and this really makes the youth unique in this point.
Okay, and Elsa.
I think change is in our hands because it has to be. No one is going to fight harder for an issue than the people that are being impacted by it. And right now, that's our generation. We're the first to inherit this, and we're the last that can change this. And so the ball has been kicked into our court, and if we don't kick it out, then we're screwed. And so that's why change is in our hands, because we don't have a choice.
How would you, what would you tell to, for example, kids and young people in my city, for example, here in Medellin, Colombia, that do not really have all of the opportunities that you girls have, but it's willing to join the cause and fight climate change? What would you tell that that group of people if they want to be part of you? What will be the suggestion or the advice to start in this path that you've chosen, Eowyn?
I think that it really just comes down to, like, I would tell them to analyze their community or to consider their community, like what skills do they have and what needs does their community have, and how can they consider both of those things and place those things into the broader climate movement. And so, it doesn't have to be like, what I did interning with OCT and then eventually getting a job there. It doesn't have to be, finding an organization through social media and joining. It can be something really, I guess some people would consider small in your community, like smaller scale from the grassroots, because really most of what movement building has been is grassroots. And so I think that by looking at your skills and seeing where you could possibly fit in, you can easily find an organization or a community, and even in your neighborhood, that would need your skills and you could actually contribute to. So I think that's a very empowering thing, to be able to look at your own abilities and then just plugging in somewhere, wherever that might be.
Okay, and Elsa, would you like to tell us?
Yeah, I would say look into your community. Everybody knows their community better than the next person beside them. And analyze what you have at your disposal, because the most powerful thing we all have at our disposal is our voices and our collective action, and that's something everybody has and nobody can take away. It's really unfortunate how like certain parts of the world receive more attention for doing the same exact work when it's less impactful than other communities and countries that are doing the same work, and it's more impactful and it's more urgent. That's really unfortunate, but also reach out to organizations that can uplift your voice, because there are organizations and people that are coalition building and want to highlight people that are not getting the recognition that they deserve, or their change isn't like they want to help amplify their change as well. But just tap into your resources that you have at your disposal, and that's yourself.
Okay, and Malina?
So I would also advise them to start like on a local basis. You can do so much in your own hometown. Like for example, if you are still in school, like found a club, try to educate yourself, to reflect on yourself also. So what can I personally change on a daily basis, for example, but also just get together and start to think of different ideas. There's so many ways in that you can join in this youth movement all around the world. You don't have, there's not this one way you have to do it. There's so many different approaches you can take, and I'm sure everyone can find his space in the movement or her space, because there's so many different opportunities.
I understand. And now, if I'm going to ask you for advice, for me, for example, adults, how can we help you to go forward with this idea, with this fight that you're taking in your hands? How can we help? How can we get involved? Elsa?
One, and you have when adults, you have a more not that you'd have a more powerful say, but you have a more effective say, and that's voting. That's something a lot of us don't have. And so voting in ways that support the youth and support this movement, that's influential. Showing up when you need it, when we need it, that's influential. You have like adults, automatically you have more resources than we do. We're a bunch of like youth, we're broke. Our organizations don't run on water. That's something we're always struggling with. Um, Organizing, we're new to this. Adults with vision that have done stuff like this before, your expertise and your help, that's appreciated. Just stepping in wherever you can and lending a hand and listening, that is how adults can be helpful.
Okay, Eowyn?
I think Elsa really covered all of the major ways that adults can help. Yeah, I think financial resources, time resources. It's been really helpful to have retired adults come in and help us with some of our work, whether that's working through legal documents or supporting the youth in some way, mentoring them. I think the ability that adults have from experience to give advice and to be mentors and to share their resources is much appreciated and super, super helpful for people, young people who are either new to the movement or are just, we don't have necessarily as much experience from years. And so I think that having that person that can give advice and just be there for us when we need it, I think that that is really valuable and important.
Okay, and Malina?
So I totally agree with you both. So I would also like to highlight that you should use your voice, like for example, by voting. That is a really, really important point, just to go to the elections and vote the right people in the best case. And also, like I think there's so many different facets to how this movement is running. Like some are striking, some others are doing this legal work. So you should really just listen to the needs of the youth and then try to support us as good as you can. So there are many different ways. Yeah.
So now that you are saying all of that, adults might reply, might tell you, we can't really think much about that because we don't have time, or all these kind of excuses they might come up with. We don't have the time to think about climate change or to educate ourselves about which which is the best idea to vote for. What would you say to that answer? Because you are young people that also take a lot of responsibilities, also have a lot of things to do, and yet you get to do many things. What would you say to that kind of possible answer? Malina, would you like to tell us?
Yeah, sure. I think the most important point is just like we don't have the time to. We take this time because we have to take this time because there's no time left for like being lazy and not caring about climate change any longer. So we are also using our free time or even our working time to deal with these issues. So you shouldn't take this as an excuse. Do the best you can and use as much time or the time you can spend on this, and take this time because no one has just like free time. You always have to take the time for something. Yeah.
Okay, Elsa.
I would say that's a lie. I'm in high school. My entire organization is in high school and college. We all are in class all day for several hours. We're either applying to college or we are in college. We all have a job. We have social lives. And then on top of that, we put in at least 30 hours a week for this organization and our work in general. We find the time because it matters, and nobody can force you to put in the time. That's a personal decision. But either you put in the time now when we have the chance to save our world, or you put in the time after everything is burnt, and your time goes towards surviving instead of thriving.
Okay, and finally, Eowyn.
Yeah, I would echo what the other two said and just say that I think it's how you manage your time. There's, everyone says like, oh, there's not enough time in a day, but really, if it matters to you, you'll make time for something, and look at your resources and see what you can do with the amount of time that you have. Maybe you can't go volunteer for 20 hours a week, but you could make a donation, or maybe you could volunteer for 2 hours a week or less than that, but find out what you can do and how much time you have and try to contribute that. I know it sucks to work and go to school and all of these things, but when it does matter, you'll do it. So just finding that time, making that time.
Wow. Well, girls, I really have to say this was a very, very inspiring and interesting conversation we just had. Thank you very much for being with us. I believe we cover up pretty much all the information, all the questions we wanted to know from you, and so on. So at this point, I would like to ask you if you want to add something extra, would like to say something to all the audience, to all the people that is listening to us at this moment, and if you want to somehow say goodbye to this meeting we just held. Elsa, we can start with you.
No, I don't have anything, but thank you for having me. And I do hope the people that are watching, I hope they tap into their resources and they get involved even more if they aren't.
Great. Eowyn?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and it was really great to be on this webinar with Elsa and Melina. And yeah, find for the youth out there, if you feel discouraged, I find that the best antidote to despair is activism, to quote some of our activist friends out there. So if you're feeling discouraged, find somewhere you can plug in, and I promise you'll feel much more encouraged.
Great. And Malina?
So I really enjoyed the talk, and thank you so much for like having me. I think the most important point is just not to give up, because we all have a voice and we should use it. And like you already said, don't feel discouraged, because there are so many other young people joining this movement, and just join us and you will learn much more. And I think that together we can really change something. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for all the things you shared with us. I'm not now going to pass the word on the low carbon city, so we can say goodbye to this special moment we all shared.
So I wanted to reiterate Tatiana's comments and all of your comments on the importance of action, on the invitation towards every young person and every adult out there to will join the movement, to support young people, to not feel discouraged. I also wanted to invite everyone to follow your respective organizations, the amazing work that All Children's Trust is doing in the federal historical lawsuit, like you said, Eowyn, what Zero Hour and local Zero Hour chapters are doing all over the world, what Plan for the Planet is doing. And I want to thank you deeply all, because this was absolutely brilliant and inspiring. And I hope it inspires even more people. Low Carbon City is at the disposition of all of you and all of the audience to help out, interconnect, and continue tackling climate change. Thank you all, and I will now stop the broadcast.
Okay.